please take our seats? Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Okay, now the next, hey Steve, you mind after the campaign leaves, you shut the doors? Thank you. So anyway, the next person, before I introduce Peter Schiff, I want to first, I want to introduce Tim Wetmore, who's the vice chair of the RTC. And for those of you who live in Westport who are not currently members, if you, we certainly would love to have you to become more involved. And please see Tim, and he can take your name down. He's over here. And I've met many of you outside, but just to reiterate, my name is Bob Zappi, and I'm the chairman of the RTC. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Peter Schiff, who is standing to my right, to come up. And again, with the same pattern as before, we have a half hour, and I'll let you choose, Peter, how much of that you want to use for Q&A and your actual presentation.
I'll try to save as much as I can for Q&A.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Peter Schiff.
So let me just tell you a little bit about me and why I'm running, and then I'll take your questions on where I stand on the various issues and why I feel I'm the best candidate to run as a Republican. Now, I was born here in Connecticut. I was born in New Haven. I didn't grow up here. We moved around. I lived in the city for a while. I moved out to the West Coast. I graduated from high school in Southern California. I went to college up in Berkeley. I was always very active in an early age as a Republican. I was a very big Ronald Reagan supporter. I voted for him a couple times, and I had a life-size picture of Ronald Reagan in my dorm room, which didn't win me any points when I would bring girls up there, up in Berkeley. But anyway, I got out of college, and I got into the financial industry. I worked for a couple of small firms originally, and then I ended up at a major wirehouse, major Wall Street firm that recently went bankrupt and was not bailed out. But anyway, I worked there for a couple of years, and I quickly discovered that I really didn't like being there. I didn't like being asked to sell products to my clients that I didn't believe in and that I didn't think was in their best interest. So I kind of wanted to go out on my own and give out the investment advice that I thought was actually best suited for my clients, because I was a retail broker. I wasn't working with the institutions. I was working with regular people asking them for their money in a trust, and I didn't want to let them down. So I went out on my own, and I started working. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Los Angeles, and I started, working from my living room. And I cold called. You don't know what that is. You pick up the phone and you dial people. And what really got my interest was the NASDAQ bubble. In the late 90s, 1998, 99, I became convinced that there was this gigantic bubble in the internet and the tech stocks, and that people were going to lose a lot of money. So I was cold calling people, warning them about what was going to happen to the NASDAQ and the tech stocks. Most people didn't listen to me. I argued with people. I tried to convince them to sell their stocks. A few people listened, and they opened up accounts with me, and I put them in more traditional investments, better value, better dividends. When the NASDAQ bubble burst in 2000, I had a long list of people I had been calling for 2 years warning about the crisis, and they were great prospects. And when I started calling them, I got a lot of accounts. And that's when my business really started to take off, kind of mid to late 2000. Fast forward to where I am now, I now have better than 100 employees working for me. I have 6 offices around the country. My headquarters is here in Westport. I have about $2 billion in customer accounts, spread about 15,000 customers. I'm involved in asset management, investment banking, a retail brokerage, research. And I think what's interesting, or the most compelling about my background and my experience, is not only am I an entrepreneur, not only did I start a business from scratch, and I started a business that's very highly regulated. In fact, the regulation that has increased in the securities industry over the years, if the regulation that existed today existed when I got started, I never could have done it. I never could have got off on my own. I now have 7 employees that do nothing but comply with government rules and regulations. If I didn't have those 7 employees, I probably had another 50 or 100 employees that were actually productive. But more so than just being an entrepreneur and knowing how to run a business and meet a payroll and grow a business, my business is specifically involved in understanding finance and economics. Day to day, I am looking at the capital markets, investment markets. I am looking at government. I'm looking at how government policy, how taxes, how regulations, how monetary policy either engender or hamper economic growth. And I'm looking at the effects of government policy on economic performance. And it was my unique understanding of economics that led me to predict in specific and precise detail the financial crisis of 2008. You know, I became very concerned about the housing bubble in 2004 when I started writing articles and posting them to the website, warning about the housing bubble. I wrote op-eds that I sent to newspapers about the housing bubble. I was warning the Federal Reserve that interest rates were too low, that they were inflating a housing bubble, that Fannie and Freddie were guaranteeing mortgages that I knew were never going to survive, and that they were endangering our entire financial system with this housing bubble. I became so alarmed that I actually wrote a book for most of 2006 that came out in February of 2007 called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse, in which I laid out cold exactly what was going to happen. And I started going on television to warn anybody who would listen to me what we were doing wrong and what the consequences were. I started going on CNBC in 2005, and I became a regular. I was on about once a week. I was on Fox News. I was on the weekend shows all the time. I was doing CNN. I was doing Bloomberg. I was on television every week for years. And CNBC started calling me Dr. Doom because of the things that I was saying. Everybody thought it was impossible. Every time I talked about the coming real estate collapse, the bursting of the housing bubble, the bankruptcy of Freddie and Fannie, the bankruptcy of General Motors, the fact that we were going to have the worst recession since the Great Depression, the fact that we were going to have double-digit unemployment, every time I said these things, I got laughed at, people snickered, but they kept inviting me back because I guess they liked the contrast. They thought it was good television. But anyway, eventually all my predictions came true, and when that happened, I developed kind of a following on the internet because a lot of people had recorded the things that I said, my television appearances, and put them on the internet. In fact, somebody put out a video called Peter Schiff Was Right, in which it featured a few of my Fox News appearances and one of the CNBC appearances. And over 1.6 million people have looked at that video. They called it Peter Schiff Was Right. And probably what was the most compelling part about that video was not all the things that I was right about, but the way everybody reacted to it. The way everybody said that I was crazy, that none of this could possibly happen. And the reason I point this out to you now is because I think it gives me a lot of credibility, because I was able to predict what nobody else in my industry could see coming, or very few people, and certainly not a single person in government saw this coming. And I think it would have been very helpful for the country, instead of making all my speeches in front of organizations around the country or on cable news, if I was giving these warnings as a senator from the Capitol. Maybe people would have listened to what I had to say, and maybe the country wouldn't be in this mess. But what's also unique about my perspective is that I understand why we have this crisis. I know it's not because of capitalism. Now that it's happened, everybody wants to blame lack of regulation, greed on Wall Street. That's not why this crisis happened. The people who are saying that are the same people who said it couldn't happen. The reason we had an economic collapse or a financial crisis was because of government. Government regulation did it. The Federal Reserve did it. The free market never would have done this. The free market would have prevented this from happening. It was government distortion. It was government-created moral hazard. It was artificially low interest rates. It was government-guaranteed mortgages. This financial crisis was a product of excess government. And the solution is not more government. Remember, that's the way we tried to solve the recession in 2001. We stimulated the economy in the aftermath of the recession that resulted from the bursting of the technology bubble. And that's why we had the economic crisis. It was the government stimulus that did it, because the stimulus was toxic. Every time we stimulate the economy with cheap money and government spending, we create a bigger problem than the one we think we're solving. And that's exactly what we've done now. And I am convinced, and even more so than before, that the real economic crisis is not in our past, but in our future. It's going to hit maybe as early as 2010, but certainly by